Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Well, as the majority of everyone knows, Victor has been part of the channel for about a year and 3 months, maybe 4 months now. And he has shared many encounters, hunts, so to say, and a lot of Q&As with us. And I've enjoyed all of them, and I know a lot of you have as well. Tonight I want to share with you my favorite. Before we get into that though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook version, written by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. They're available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. The links to those books are in the description as well. Now, everyone, I've taken enough of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? The San Leandro Hunt, April 18th, 1992. Dogman kills 2 fugitives on the run. Well, it was a slow day, and just about every agent was in the office enjoying coffee and some bad jokes. The CO calls me in and asks if Elias is ready for field training. I reply he's the youngest man here right now, but this agent can really shoot. I also remind the CO of what happened when he was put before Raphael, that he had passed out. But on the account of his shooting ability, we did hire him. He's very fast and accurate with a handgun, deadly accurate to be exact. We talk a few more minutes and call him in to join the conversation. He is agreeable to everything my CO and myself are talking about. So we are supposed to report to San Leandro Police Department to pick up our file, which is not normal operating procedure. I tell him to saddle up and he tells me he needs to go to the barracks and get his equipment. Everyone roars with laughter. Not so much at him, but at me, because this is going to be a babysitting trip. At this time, I still had 2 or 3 people ahead of me in rank, but I was trying to make my way through them the best as I could without busting any buns. He finally makes it back about 25 minutes later, and we head to the helicopter pad to take off. I tell him to get comfortable and rest as best as he can, because when we hit the ground, we'll move fast, and he'll want to slow down. All he wants to do is talk and know what to expect after we hit the ground. I try to keep it together and keep my cool with this young Marine. I explain what I expect out of him, and he is paying almost too close attention. He is reading my lips and hearing me, also absorbing everything I say. And it's like he's a robot or something. After about 4 hours of this, and dark comes upon us, he finally backs off and gets into position to sleep. He looks like a young kid lying there. It would make you think of your own kids back at home. Finally, sleep came for me, and I felt us landing, and we were putting down to refuel before carrying on with our trip. I got out of the cargo area, and Elias slept right through the whole ordeal, even starting the Chinook up and taking off. And I don't see how he could ever do that. It was well after daylight when we landed the next morning, somewhere between 10-40 hours, and they had a car waiting for us. We put our gear in the back seat, and we are wearing our weapons when we enter the police station. We met with the police chief, Chief Bullard, and the game warden, Brian Johnson, who had a file and was going to take us out to the scene of the attack. So I ask why the police are involved. He states that this started out as a robbery gone bad at a grocery store late in the day, that a male entered the grocery store and was going to rob it, and his female accomplice was already in the store, but no one knew she was with him. So there had been 2 officers in plain clothes off duty, when all this went down, so they confronted him, and now he was outgunned. He grabs a hostage. The hostage is his accomplice, unknown to the police, so they back off. And it's almost dark outside now, and he and her are making the way to the door slowly. Other units are on their way, but don't get there before they reach the outside, and are able to make it under the 580, going east on foot into Chabot Park. They then called in the dogs and the game wardens to assist in the search for the two fugitives. Then Brian and the state patrols took over and explained that they traveled about 1 mile due east and were nearing Redwood Road when they were attacked by dogs, as best as he can tell. That's where the female's body is, and we have men there with her standing guard to make sure they don't come back and feed on the body, or anyone happens by. It's a good place for homeless people to camp. I asked about the man. His pistol is lying there empty, but we found where he crossed the road, and he is hurt because we found he is losing blood where he crossed the road as well. But we have not tracked him any further because we don't know what we are dealing with. I say dogs, but I really don't think dogs could do this to a human being. No way. Brian said, and the police chief interjected and said, "I'm sure he doesn't want to hear no Indian tales, Brian." I took Brian aside and asked what he thought it might be, and he said it was a dogman, and that his grandfather had taught him about them. There were a few pictures in the file, but I could tell by looking at the photos that he was right in what he was telling me, and he knew what had killed the female and probably was going to kill the man. We rejoined the chief, and I told him I needed to be put out where they went under the Interstate 580. Brian said, "That's where I come in now. I'm your ride now," and I said, "Good." We'd get out of his truck, and I'd tell him to give me a few minutes and ask how far we are from where they went under the interstate. He says we're 7 minutes out. Completely going through the file and ask him to start driving and hand the file to Elias to read and tell him he has 7 minutes to come up to speed in the case. He actually got close to 11 minutes due to traffic lights. We park the truck and I and Elias get out and get ready to start the tracking process on this pair of fugitives and which way they went. I asked Brian to drive around to the other end and go to the body to meet us there, but not to come on the west side of the body till after we come and check out. Move everyone to the east side of the body and keep them there. Have the ambulance there so they can pick her up once we're finished. Okay, he said yes and headed on his way as we did. We entered Chabot Park, just south of the zoo, as you could hear the animals making their noises and all the sounds associated with the zoo. I told Elias to settle down and quit shaking like he was, and he stated it was excitement, that everyone said I was the one to learn from, and he wanted to read my file about Little America and how I survived. I told him, let's clean this up and pick up the track on these people, then we'll move forward after that. He shook his head okay. Just as soon as we dropped out of sight from everyone, I asked him to stop, turned him around, and pulled and checked his pistol. Nothing was in the chamber. Then I checked his rifle. Nothing in the chamber, and I asked why. He said we was not hunting, and I informed him that once we left that truck, we were actively hunting, which he could not believe. I loaded both of his weapons, replaced the pistol in his holster, and said don't ever forget how to use it, and keep it ready always. Handed the rifle back to him with the safety on, and told him the same thing. Also telling him to take point, pick up their trail, and lead me to her body slowly, and to listen to my instruction to a T. I stayed maybe 10 yards behind him, till he picked up their trail. I had been watching their trail for almost 50 yards prior to him picking it up and pointing it out to me. We had traveled into some sanded area, and I pulled young Ellis to stop. He knelt down and waited for me to give him the signal. or a verbal command to move on. After about 3 minutes and finding 2 different sets of Dogman tracks, I let him know it was okay to move, and we moved about 100 yards, and he throws up his fist and drops to one knee, and I freeze dead in my tracks. He motions me forward and low. I do so, and he points out 3 sets of dog tracks and a .40 caliber handgun casing, a single shot. I put a rock on top of the casing, pat him on the shoulder, and he grinned ear to ear. I pointed forward with 2 fingers, another 200 yards, and up came his fist again. This kid really knows how to run point. Only he will be able to run it under pressure of real targets. Now we are up to 4 targets, and I'm only here with 1 agent who has never fired his weapon at a living target other than human beings. Yes, he has 12 confirmed kills, but that still doesn't prove himself against monsters, especially after passing out facing Raphael. Also, he locates 2 more cases. So there are poor folks know these creatures are after them. While he is setting small rocks on top of these casings, I'm looking around in the bushes to see if I can find any blood, but there is nothing to find. So he is not shooting at them or hitting them. And these creatures are running all around them. Why is he not shooting at them more than what he was? We've only found 3 empty casings so far. There should be 10 or 12 minimum with a .40 cal. I could think, have never owned a .40 cal, so I don't know about them. So now it's getting later in the day, and we reach the body, and Brian has everyone a good 30 yards east of the body, with the ambulance sitting on ready to pick up this poor lady. So as we go study the scene, I can tell that Elias is turning a little green around his gills, and ask him to take a walk and see how far it is to where he crossed the road, and told him to watch himself. After he returned and reported back, I had talked with Brian, and it looks like she was running behind the man, and she tripped, and then 1, maybe 2, got on her back, and 1 or the other penetrated her aorta, and all of the blood drained out in a matter of minutes. Plus 1 or both slashed her back once, maybe twice. I told one of the officers on scene that the body could be picked up and that there was no longer a need for them to stay in the area once the body was gone. Just clean up all the tape and remove everything that they could. They said that they would comply with them orders and leave and report back to the chief. I thanked them, one and all, and once again, young Elias asked why I did this after we had them leave. And I asked him, are you any better than any of them men that was working the hot-ass beat to make a living for their families and putting their lives on the line every day? He answered no. He said he would be back in a few minutes. I told him just to catch up. We stopped at Brian's truck, and I asked Brian if he had any plans for tonight, tomorrow, or the next few days, till we found this guy's body, and he replied, I thought you'd never ask. I told him that once we found that other body, his part would be over, and he would not be able to continue on with us as we go after the Dogman. He said that he understood fully. Brian opened up the back and set out a small pack and said it had everything in it he would need to go with us. He had 2 boxes of .375 H&H Magnum ammunition rifle and a .357 Magnum pistol, and then the basic camping supplies and a 3-day supply of food. We were just about to walk away, and here comes young Elias, and he wants to take lead. And I say no this time, and he starts to question me, then sees that Brian is tagging along and thinks better of it before he says anything about it. I take the point, but Brian 5 yards behind me, and Elias 10 yards behind Brian, and tell him to keep his eyes peeled sharp, that I only shoot north, east, south, and Brian shoots north and south only, and Elias shoots north, west, and south. Everyone got the orders. It was now dark, and Brian had his own night vision goggles. I asked Brian where we were headed, and he said if he headed northeast, that would take us into a fairly large mountain for quite a long while before we hit any type of civilization. But if we stayed due east, we would be traveling toward San Ramon, California. I tracked this man till just after 1:20 hours, and the howling started. We set up figuring that they smelled us, and I set us up on a tight perimeter. How was I going to explain having a game warden on the hunt with me? I knew this was not going to end well for me. We all hunkered down. I was 20 yards out in front of everyone else. I figured I was good for 4, especially back then. I was much faster, and everything I did was just much quicker, smoother movements back then. The night wore on, and nothing ever happened. It never went totally quiet, and they never approached us that night, but I realized another problem with Elias that night. When he fell to sleep, he snores and snores very badly. That is something else. He is going to have to talk to the CO about things. We mounted up against him, and he was just so likable, it was crazy. Now, you had to like him after you were around him for just a little while. I was up before light and had some coffee on, and Brian ended up shaking Elias awake and getting him stirring, but he finally did. We woke him up early to start the day. I laughed and said, "What are you going to do when you have to go on a 3 or 4 day straight without sleeping? We almost had to do it last night." He went ahead and got up, stowed his gear, and was ready to leave out whenever I was, and I stated it would be after good daylight so that we didn't miss anything that we could have missed in the dark. I know he was still on his feet at this point, and he said, "How do you know this?" And I shined my light between his feet. And there was track of blood. I explained you always have to be on the lookout for these types of signs. The victims and the predators, they are all around here, but no one said anything about them last night before I put this information out. Brian said he saw the tracks last night, but figured since we were on the trail, there was no use of saying anything about them. "Why should we say anything?" came out of Elias's mouth. And I snapped back to let him know that you are paying attention, and I'm not out babysitting you like everyone back in the office thinks I'm doing right now. "Why would they think that?" he shouted back. "Because your actions. No, we don't make you get up at certain hours, and yes, you can report when you want, but you need to look at what you do and what we are up against. Monsters for a living. Sure, you can't go out and brag about it to anyone. They fought a monster and came out ahead. I told him, look, nobody wanted to go on the first hunt with you, and I kept my mouth shut, never said one way or another. I was third in line to go out, and I knew when I was called in that this was going to be your tag-along, and I never said a word in one way. I bragged at how good of a shot you were, and I reminded the CO of what happened when you got put in front of Raphael. And I don't think you have been back to the enclosure since, and yes, this worries me. At the time, Brian is staring at me much more and more questions building up, and I can see them building up. So I turn to Brian and tell him, Brian, I can't answer any of your questions you are going to ask, so please don't ask any. He tips his hat, but continues to listen. I then say after we find this body that Brian will drop out of our little team, call in, and get help to get the body out, and we will continue to catch up with the Dogman, and we will take the 4 of them out. Sun's up good now, and it appears to be a sunny April day in California. I'm standing about 40 yards from Brian and Elias. comes by and says he's sorry. I tell him no problem. Let's just work together as one machine instead of two different ones and do our duty. Hoorah, sir, and off he goes, thinking he's feeling better about himself now, but also thinking he will be high maintenance to keep motivated and going in the right direction. We leave out me on point and Elias in the middle and Brian on our tail. We have turned almost due north, and Brian has picked up on this as we start to enter a highly rocky area. Much easier to track the man now with the blood droplets showing on the rocks. Also a good place to get ourselves ambushed, so I tighten the group up. As we continue to move forward, I spot the man's foot and stop everyone and ask everyone to look closely and see what they see. And both of them spot the foot within a couple of minutes. I put them back to back as I move forward to check the situation and find the man deceased and eaten mostly from the waist up is gone. No way to identify him, and this day is slipping away. And I don't think it's safe to leave Brian here alone, so I break out the satellite and make a call to the CO and report in that it's for Dogman and we are on the trail, and he asked if I wanted another agent to join us, and Ellis can hear our conversation, and I tell him no, that me and Ellis have this, and the CO says, "Are you sure?" And I say, "Yes, sir." Hoping in my heart he can just get one, that's all I'm asking, just one. That made his spirits raise that much higher. Someone was putting some faith into this young man, and maybe this would make him grow. Only time would tell. It's now 15:55 hours, and he had just gotten the coordinates called in, and they told Brian to tell us to go on, that they should be there around midnight, and he could guard the body, and then help get it out, that they were sending 6 men in. I told Elias to make camp. We would hunt tomorrow and tomorrow night. We all got comfortable 40 yards away from the body, with a little better view, should they return during the night. We laughed and caught up, and before dark, I changed my shirt, and Brian said, "What the hell got a hold of you?" Elias jerked around, and I stood there for a moment, and then I put my shirt on and told him a werewolf. He said they are real, I answered, and spent the next hour telling him about the Wyoming hunt. In Elias's eyes, you could tell that he would never make it. If he went up against a werewolf, he would lose. You could see it in his eyes, his face. I knew this now, but I had to continue down this road with him, and knew I had to protect him and get him back to Virginia so the CO could fire him. But the boy would be at least alive. I knew he could fool me, and we would soon find out. The dark settled in on us along with the clouds as well. You couldn't see the body unless you were about 20 yards away. Everyone had picked the spot to sleep, but I moved both Brian and Elias side by side so I could see them, watch the body, and watch the trail from one spot, all at one time. Didn't seem like it took long for them to drift off asleep. I was supposed to wake one of them up at 0100 to take over and watch, but I wasn't going to trust myself to either one of these guys. Also, the other 6 came in at 23:15, and I put all of them where I could watch and told them to rest well. I was used to doing what I was doing for days on end, so they just made as little noise as possible and went to bed. Woke everyone up the next morning, and someone else broke out the coffee for everyone, and we drank till everyone was full, and we cleaned up the area, and 2 men went down and took pictures of the body. They were with the sheriff's office. They had me to point out the footprints, the cleanest ones I could find. He was missing 1 shoe, and we all spent that day and never did find that shoe, but I tracked him to the spot, and he had 2 shoes on the whole while. After they got everything, they said they needed to put the body in a body bag and start back with Brian. Brian tried to continue on with us, but I reminded him of our earlier conversation, and he shook my hand and off he went, giving me his number to call when we returned to pick us up. I thanked him again, and myself and Elias was off to do what we were here to do. 11:20, and we could no longer see or hear them, and we started to track. And I'm on point with Elias, maybe 8 yards beyond, and every once in a great while we would hear a lone howl, but nothing close to the woods. Never went silent, but there was a strange feeling in the air. Nothing I can put my finger down, and nothing I'm worried about. Is just something there. Now it's 16:20 hours, and the woods are totally silent. In one step, everything goes quiet. I threw up my fist and put him on the ground in a defensive position, and we are both scanning the woods, but neither of us were able to see anything or hear anything at this time. I hold us in this position for as long as the woods remain silent, which is probably at least 3 minutes before the woods came back to life, and I stand up and approach Elias. He asked what just happened and didn't recognize the silence. So we back up about 100 yards. This kid has me on edge, and I don't want to move forward with him like this. So I told him to bed down and I will take first watch again. And he has caught on that I don't intend on sleeping any of these nights. And if I sleep during the day, it will only be short naps at that. And I reply, yes. He started to build a fire, and I said, no fire tonight. Sorry, just roll out your sack and get in. As he laid down, he asked, have I made you mad, sir? Have I done something so terribly wrong that I can't continue? I say, no, Elias. There are some things that you will have to address with the CO that could get yourself killed. And if you have a second agent with you, get them killed as well, if you don't get something done about it. And some things are just plain simple mistakes that you can fix on your own, and some you can't fix on your own. Get you some rest. You're going to need it tomorrow. So I stood guard through the night again without waking Elias up, and the forest going quiet and then opening back up again, back and forth through the night of howls that sounded no more than maybe 100 yards away. Me tucked away beside Elias, maybe 7 foot, just in case anything came in close or smelled us out. I was ready, tired, and ready for whatever they threw at me. This night, I was ready, but again, they never came for us. And why didn't they come? They knew we were here. Why? Here came the sun, so I put on the coffee just to see if my talk had done any good. I didn't wake Elias up. I actually thought about leaving him in his sack and moving on without him, but that wouldn't be right. But I did use the time to call in and talk to the CO and gave him a heads up on everything that has went wrong so far, and he asked for my recommendations. And I said a very stern write-up and assign him to only one type of cryptid that will make him a specialist of Dogman. That is all he will deal with is Dogman. The CO was agreeable to that if Elias would be. We had to see if he agreed to that. He arose finally at 10:30 hours, and you could see guilt in his eyes. He started to speak, and I held up my hand. I didn't want to hear any more from him. He ducked his head and put his things away and arose and drank a cup of coffee, and we were off soon. We were in some very large rocks that had a lot of overhangs, and we had to check most of them as they had to be looked into. Elias was not saying very much today. He knew after the talk I had given him, I was expecting more out of him, and he had let me down. I didn't know where he came up with these hours like he did, but that's what he had in his head. I kept telling him to get his head into the game. Something was wrong, and he kept waving me off, and I was hoping he was right, but that nagging gut feeling kept going back over and over. The silence would come and go, and it was like they were toying with us. But I was not going to let that win. No way, no how. So now we were down in some deep rocks, and we are not going to get out before it's dark. I tell him to put his night vision goggles on. We are going to hunt through the night. So we both get ready for the night. I can see the sun is still shining above. So we sit down for 1 hour and get me a little rest. And a little rest means a lot right now. So I open my eyes 55 minutes later, and he is amazed that I can do that without any kind of alarm. And I tell him, you train your body to do such things. So we are up and working in the dark, now at the bottom's edge of these giant boulders, and some openings in the bottoms of them, looking for signs to see if they are using any of these natural openings for cover. Now it's 2200 hours, and he said he has to change the batteries in his night vision goggles. So we find a good place to do this, and it's done in less than 2 minutes, and we are back up operating. Time seems to be dragging, and everything is just still. It's now 0025 hours, and Elias says his bladder needs a break. I agree, and we both stop about 30 feet apart, relieve ourselves. He comments that we are never going to catch up to these dogmen, and I say that we will soon enough. I started to say something, and his hand flew up, and we both dropped to our kneeling position and began to listen intently. It was coming from my right and ahead of me. I glanced back at Elias to see where he was to my left by maybe 8 yards and maybe 3 yards behind my location, while this noise was getting closer and closer. Then the noise just quit. No movement anywhere, and it remained this way for several minutes, and we held our position. I glanced over to make sure Elias was not moving any, and he was holding like he was supposed to. Then there was some small noises and movement, and I trained my rifle to this area of brush it seemed to be coming from, and there was an opening big enough to get through. I was worried about Elias. I could see his eyes, and they were as large as saucers, and he didn't have his rifle in the ready position as well. I knew that they were going to get ready to come out, but from where, I was uncertain about that. I thought I knew, but seldom does a dogman hit you from head on, mostly from the sides and rear. But rear was covered, so they had 2 sides and the front, but Elias was not looking to his left, and we had not even went over the shooting pattern when we got down to business. I was hoping he remembered what he had been taught, to try to let all targets get into view before we open up on them. But sometimes this will not work, and you do what has to be done. Then came a loud snap, and here they came from 3 directions, and I'm seeing them come from all directions and know in my head instantly that there are more than 4. And I dropped number 1 and then number 2, but they came from straight in front of me now. I have Dogman closing in front of my in from the right side, getting very close, and still have more coming from the front. And Elias has not shot yet. I can't think about Elias right now and shoot number 3 to my right and number 4 to my right and scream at the same time, Elias, get into the fight or you're going to die or kill both of us. I wheel around and kill number 5 right in front of me, maybe 3 yards away. I glance at Elias and he's just standing there staring at me. His whole chest is missing. And I start to lunge for him, and I'm cut off by a pair of dogman. It's like they are grinning at me with blood and intestines hanging from their hands. I raise my rifle and start to scream, and bust both in the head, and they go down, number 6 along with number 7. At this point, I think that I'm going to die. Too many dogman left to fight. Still, as I turn to face the remaining dogman, one dives and knocks my rifle from my hands, and rakes my right thigh with his left hand and claws, and takes his right hand and claws, and sticks them into my stomach very low. I am still able to pull my pistol, and put it against his head and pull the trigger, and this action blows his right hand out of my stomach, and I take a foot and push him away. I glance at Elias. He is on his knees about to fall, and I still have 3 more Dogman to deal with. And when I try to stand, I fall backwards into the brush, which helps me hide some from the Dogman, and they have come straight on, more or less, now to get me. Then they don't at all rush me. One at a time they come, and I let them get close, and when they do, I shoot each one with a single shot and take each down. And finally, after all the smoke is cleared, I realize that I killed 11 Dogman by myself. I got up and made my way over to Elias. He was on the ground, and he was just so barely hanging to life, and asked me if he was going to die, and I gave him an honest answer as I could. I told him that if it was his time to die, he was, and if it wasn't, I would get him out of here. But I knew in my heart that he would never get out alive. He had my hand and explained his parents had no money to bury him, and he didn't take any insurance, and I told him not to worry. If something was to happen to him, I'd take care of his funeral expenses, and he died seconds later. I knew in my heart I was going to make Elias a hero, so everyone would never say anything bad about him again. I looked for our radio so I could find either one to call for an extraction. I figured I was going to have to carry Elias out because you don't leave your fellow American behind. So I placed him inside his sleeping bag and bandaged up my wound, wrapped him in his sack, and loaded my rifle and pistol and carried 1 extra magazine for each just in case. Finally, got him across my shoulder and just started what I considered to be a 6-day trip out. The first day, I may have traveled 3 miles carrying Elias's body, if I made it even that far. The woods kept falling into silence, and I worried that there was more Dogman and that they were following me. I was now tired, hurt, and alone. This night, I was thinking that I knew that I killed 11 Dogman that day and had proof to back it up. So what I planned on doing was to make Elias a hero so that everyone would shut up about him. I knew everyone would believe me, except the CO, and if I put it in writing, he would not have challenged it. And he was not there, so didn't see that happening. He didn't want to draw any undue attention his way. I woke up early the next morning. Man, I was hurting. Sure wish I could have found either mine or Elias's sat radio, so I could have called for a pickup. I tried to walk for 8 hours, but things were not working out too well for me doing this at all, actually. I wasn't about to leave Elias's body for some animal to chew on. It was already where his parents couldn't have an open coffin. This day, in 8 hours, I figured I'd travel 5 miles only. I was very weak, and following morning, there was a slight breeze and a very cloudy and sprinkling rain, not heavy rain, just enough to get wet, and that sleeping bag in his body was now taking on water weight and fast, and the ground was slicker by the end of this 3rd day. I knew where I was, but I still had at least 1 day's walk to get where I found the man's body, if everything went good. I bedded down at night, and the woods were as still, as quiet as could be. No sound, no movement, no nothing. So I decided to sit up for a while. Something's feeling bad wrong again, and I can't put my finger on it. If you can't see it, you can't shoot it or fix it, and this is about the place. The first time I had such a bad feeling. I'm lying on top of my sleeping bag, plenty warm, and something snapped. I mean, it's way too close for me to ever grab either one of my guns. It was on the ground beside me, the pistol's in my holster. And I mean less than 2 feet from my head to where it snapped lightly. I started to turn, and it pounced on me, about 30, maybe 40-pound cougar cub. scared the bejesuses out of me. I thought I had been had. After about 4 or 5 minutes, it took off. I don't know where its mom or dad was, but glad I didn't have to find out. I finally dozed off, and I had my first nightmare. I hear Elias calling my name, and I rise up to see him sitting on a rock maybe 10 feet from me, his chest ripped out. He asked me over and over why I hadn't tried harder to save him, and finally I snapped to it, and it's still dark with no sign of Elias, but I'm soaking wet with sweat again, and cold now that I am exposed to the elements and have to get inside my sleeping bag, but never went back to sleep. Daybreak comes, and I am off again, with everything I have in me to make some extra time today. At least make it to where I found the man's body by lunch. My body is screaming, no more, no more. I sit beside a tree and wake up. It's dark. Not sure how far I made it on this day, or what time it is, the 4th day. And on this night, once again, the nightmares return 3 different times. I fall asleep each time I awake to the same dream. The last time, every direction I look, I saw Elias, so I no longer slept that night. After the 3rd attempt, day 5, up with the sun and new problem. Rigor mortis has set in, buzzards are overhead. And off away, he is flat as a board, not bent in his body whatsoever. I have to get Elias at just the perfect spot to be able to carry him, and it's terribly hard to balance. Nothing to eat, going to have to find some water today. My canteen is almost dry as well, so I have to keep my eyes open for water, also wishing for a lot of things right now. Tried not to sleep last night, but fell asleep sitting up. Twice had nightmares. Now when I get back to Virginia, that I will need to see someone to get help and make these nightmares go away somehow. Trying to conserve my water and not drink any today. No food, and going to be tomorrow before I reach Plato. Where are all the people when you need them? I never can answer my own question when needed. Day 6, ran out of water last night and have not had any food for 6 days. Haven't even seen anything to shoot. Getting weaker by the day. I'm sure hate leaving Elias up here and go and get help, but that may be what I have to do. I'm going to get to the top of the plateau in just a couple more hours, so maybe, just maybe, today will be a good day. I've made it just past the place where we found the man, which means once I top this plateau, it will be all flat, and maybe just a little downhill from here to the road. From here, maybe 2 more days tops. Get up this morning and get started and fall and hit my right knee on a rock from the fall and let go of a couple cuss words. It didn't help my situation at any time, but I didn't let them roll. I was able to get Elias up on my shoulder again, and the rigor had let go out of his body, and it once again draped over my shoulder, and we were off. Seemed like the easiest day of carrying the young agent yet, so making good time, and my right leg starting to cramp up on me, so I soon find a place to lay young Elias on the ground and check my leg. Looking around and seeing no one, I dropped my pants to inspect my legs. My right leg had started to swell some. So back on with the pants and take an hour rest and go again with my plan. Wake myself back up, stand up, and a shooting pain goes through my leg like nothing I have felt. There's an infection in the wound. And it's in my stomach wound. I have no clean bandages. My shirt is soaked with his blood and body fluids from carrying him, and my pants are the same way. Nothing to get clean strips out from. I then turn my attention to my sleeping bag, and there are some clean strips that I can use to redress my wounds. I spend the next hour and a half tearing strips to redo my wounds, knowing it's all downhill from here. Next thing, I would take the stomach bandages off first and look at these wounds. They look like they've healed up and didn't appear to have any infections around them, and this makes me feel a lot better. I get it dressed back up and feel better about myself, and then I drop the pants again and start to unwrap my leg, and I soon realize that I am in a whole lot of trouble myself. When I get it all unwrapped and looked at it, it was oozing black and green pus from just about every inch of the wound. I was trying to figure out what to clean it with, and finally spotted some moss. So I headed for that, and the pain was almost unbearable trying to walk. I knew I had to get this wrapped back up and headed out into the road once more, or I would stiffen up and not be able to move, and I had to push through this. Once again, it was time to get him up on my shoulder and go on the road with Elias. I was going to keep my word to him and make him out a hero in this hunt, even though it would not be true, but it would pay for his funeral for his parents. I was able to get him on my shoulder for some trouble this time, and went on till it was totally dark. I laid him down and got what was left of my bag and laid it out and lay down myself. I was sure hungry and thirsty at this time, and I felt like my body was shutting down. My leg was throbbing, so I didn't think that I'd sleep would come so easily as it did. But the nightmares after I had woken up 2 times, and I figure it wasn't even midnight yet, and started to watch the far west horizon. And I think I can see cars on the interstate, but there is no sounds from them, and I realize there is no sound around me. For the first time I notice the smell from Elias's body, and I start to regain some of my composure and take in my surroundings, knowing that something is on his scent, a natural predator. For how long have I not been paying attention to this? Is it a cougar's parent close, and if so, where? I brighten up, start looking around, trying to figure out anything that doesn't look right. A chance movement that I can pick up. Come on, Bill. You're better than this. Where's your mind? Just have to get through tonight, and tomorrow you will be at the road, I tell myself, but not the silence hurts my ears. It's almost even scary to me. It's that still and quiet. I gaze back into the west horizon and see no lights from cars or the interstate now, but I know where I am, and at least tomorrow it will be downhill and flat walking. Soon I had went to sleep again due to my tank being empty, and suffered through not waking up from a nightmare this time and slept through it. I woke up and it was almost daylight. Nothing had happened to his body after I fell asleep, and nothing happened to me. So I waited for the sun to get up before I left to help and warm me up, as I was very stiff and was having trouble moving and not able to stand up yet. I was giving myself pep talks mentally and knew something was wrong, so I stripped out the last of the strips on my bag and checked my leg one more time, and it was looking worse daily. Then yesterday I thought to myself, I've got to get out of here. The buzzards were even landing near me, and Elias's body on the ground, but I had to get up and put his 100 or so pound body on my shoulder and get moving, so they would leave us alone. Finally, we are up and on our way, and it's our best day ever. We have traveled, believe it or not. I had found water earlier in the day, but I only filled the canteen and didn't wash the wound because I had no steri strips to put it back on with. So I didn't undress it, and knowing tomorrow would be able to get help. I have no bag to lie on, and my leg, since I have sat down, feels like it's swelling, but I drift off to sleep, and after a minute, the whole while awake, I hear some type of noise. I only open my eyes, no movement from me, just my eyes, to see if I can spot anything close. Nothing. I heard something, so I start turning my head, and apparently here is someone's pet dog. I must be close to home somewhere. It's got a collar on, and it's friendly, but I have nothing to write with, nothing to put a note on it with. But this at least means that tomorrow we will get out of here. I know I only have maybe 5 miles being out of here now at the most, and I am excited. And then the dog takes off running and is gone in the same general direction that I will be walking out of. And back to sleep I go, not worrying about anything at this moment, just rest. Then again, not long after I went back to sleep, I was awoken by the same noise, something coming into our area, and I watch, and here comes the same dog. And about 5 minutes later, a second dog, a black lab, comes in and sits down, and it has a beacon collar of some sorts on. It's flashing, and they are both barking about every 10 minutes. After another hour goes by, I see flashlights in the distance. Not knowing who they are, I hide, and I have my rifle ready, just in case it's someone's land I happen to be on, and they don't want to listen to reason, but these dogs react to them. Soon they approach and find the sleeping bag, and I can see Brian and 5 other men. I call out to him. He comes over and says he figured I was overdue, and that good or bad, he and 5 other wardens were coming in to try to help find us. He then asked about Elias, and so I made him a hero right then and there, but said we didn't want this to go in the paper. I told him what was left back there, and that there was an automatic weapon back there also that needed to be retrieved at some point. Also to be 2 handheld radios if they could be found. I told him where I put the rifle, but I couldn't find the radios, and that I needed to get to a helicopter. He then saw my wounds and went to a different gear about getting me out of there. He was going to leave Elias's body and take me out and go back and get him, but I explained this was the 7th day and I was not leaving him behind at this point. They could get me on my feet, I would walk, and they could carry Elias out on a stretcher that they had brought with them. I asked how far it was going to be before getting out of here. He said maybe 2 miles, if that. One of the men had built up a fire and stretched out a bag for me to lie on, and I told him I would ruin it if I lied on it. He laughed and said it would give him an excuse to buy a new one. I went ahead and lied down. They fed me some groceries and put some coffee on. Oh, coffee was sure good. I could drink a whole pot. While we had been talking, 3 of them had put the sleeping bag that I had Elias's body in inside of a body bag, and the odor was gone almost immediately, except what was on me, and I smelled like death warmed over me. Early, just as the sun rose, 5 men lifted me onto a gurney and started for the road, and a large man took the lead with Elias draped over his shoulder. When we arrived to the coroner was waiting, and so was an ambulance to take me to the hospital. I spoke with the coroner and told him that we were jumped by a pack of probably 20 wild dogs, and that we killed the majority of them, and that any testing that needed to be done on me, and to turn Elias's body over to either the CIA or FBI, so his parents could bury him. So cause of death, animal attack, and problem taken care of by 2 agents with a loss of 1 agent. And I said this correct. He went away shaking his head, clearly not happy at getting told as what to put on the death certificate without examining the body. But he did it, just as he was told. I called the CO from Brian's phone and reported what had happened, just verbally. He called me a liar, but I said he would notify the family, and when the arrangements were made, he would find out the financial details for me so I could pay for it for the family. I told him I would fill out my paperwork just as soon as I was out of the hospital and able to hike back and retrieve my automatic weapon and try to find the 2 radios. They then took me to the hospital and began working on my wounds. They bathed them and soaked them in special solution. I would soak in that twice a day in a whirlpool-type bath to get everything out of the wound. On the 3rd day, they finally sewed it back up with 344 stitches in my leg now, too. One of the nurses was nice enough to go purchase me some new clothes with my card and bring them to me, and Brian and his wife offered me a place to stay and a vehicle to drive back and forth to the doctor's. Most of the time his wife took me because I didn't know where the offices were. It finally came to the day the stitches came out, and I was going out to get the other weapon, and Brian decided he was going to join me on that trip. And I tell him that after I let him see them, that I will have to erase his memory from his brain, and he laughs and just says, "That's fine," and we talk, and I realize we could actually use this guy on our team. I start to see just how much he really knows, and I talk to the CO about him and ask if we could make any exceptions. He asks which one, and I say I don't know yet. Let me qualify him, and I will let you know. He may not be interested in moving all the way across country. I asked if he would be interested in working along with me and doing what I do, and he asked, "What do I mean?" I told him I hunt monsters. He smiled again and said to show him first, then we'll talk. We are both in good shape, and I am weak, and it takes 2 days and a half almost to get where we fought the Dogman. I pick up the rifle and find my radio in the bushes, where I was knocked back into the brush, so deep when the one took a dive at me and got my leg and stomach, it must have hit the radio and knocked it free. Brian has a cloth over his mouth looking at the remains of the Dogman and says, "How on earth do these things actually live here among us?" He asked to see one of the rifles, and I handed him Elias's. And he saw the magazine as number 1, and he opened his pack and found 11 more magazines in his pack, numbered 2 through 12, and asked if he wore a vest. I answered he did. How many magazines were in his vest, and I said it was ripped away. I couldn't for sure say, and he showed me the numbered magazines. Brian figured out that he had never fired a shot, said he didn't have any reloads in his vests for the fight. Finally, right at dark, found his radio 50-odd yards away from where the body was. We made it out in 2 days, and I asked Brian again about working, and he was going to have to think about it. And I got Lewis on the phone and took care of Brian's memory. For a short period, we parted ways, and I never heard from him till almost 8 years later. I get a call, and I recognize the voice, and he tells me about his wife and kids. They have 2 kids now, and he can't leave because he has to have help with the kids, and his parents are not going to move, and her parents aren't moving either. And she had been killed in a robbery for like $39. She was killed because she refused to hand over her money. So that is the San Leandro hunt. One of my favorite hunts, and sorry for the reading, but that was typed out by Victor, and he typed it out very quickly, and it's very hard to read. I need to go through it and kind of fix it up so it's a little easier to read. I don't know. This hunt actually shows me who Victor is, and I hope you guys who haven't heard it can see that as well. Anyway, have a great night, guys, and thanks for always listening. See ya!